Hello Internet, welcome to my kitchen. So this week is an extension of the previous weeks, which is climate change. So I've been wandering down multiple paths trying to explore different topics. And this week I've gotten onto the storage problem, which I'll explain in a second. But first I wanted to say go to the post if you want to learn more about this. So this video is just going to be some insights, but not the entire thing. So you should go there and check it out. I go into the different types of storage mechanisms to store energy, talk about the problem in itself, talk about batteries, talk about multi-headed hydras, all kinds of good jazz. So you should check that out. Today we're going to talk about the storage problem. So what is the storage problem? Well, there's an analogy and a quote that a lot of people like to use in the renewable energy space. So renewable energy being solar, wind, hydro, all that stuff. But specifically in the reference of solar and energy, a lot of people like to talk about how the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. So if that's the case, how do we provide energy to people that need energy all the time, like ourselves? We need energy 24/7. Well, we need to be able to store it. And this problem of the storage problem is actually a good one, and it's a good one to have, because the way that it came about is the fact that solar has become more prevalent in the world and a lot more people are using it. It's becoming cheaper, the capacity is improving. There's a little chart I'll show here that basically shows the drastic growth and drop in cost. And this is really the silver lining to this whole storage problem. So at the heart of the storage problem is this concept called the duck curve. And the duck curve I'll show here in a graph basically shows that when everyone is away at work or away doing something else, there tends to be a massive influx both in the power generated from renewables, but also a decrease in the amount of power needed by the people using it at home. So that's where the belly of the dip is, where basically no one's home, no one's using energy, but solar and wind tend to be at their peak in the middle of the day between like 10 and 3. But when everybody comes home for dinner in the evening to do activities, etc., that's when energy is most needed, but that's when the energy from these renewable resources is actually at its least peak of generation. So we need to basically figure out a way to take all that energy that's generated during the day when no one's home and provide it to the people later in the day when they actually need it. And that's where this whole renewable storage problem comes into play. So we understand the problem. This is kind of it in a nutshell. There's a lot more detail to it, but in a nutshell, that's what it is. So there are multiple ways that we can actually store energy. A surprise to me and a surprise to most people, because when we tend to think of energy storage, we think of this, usually a battery, right? But there are many different ways that you can store energy. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but there are tons of them, and I'll just name a few here. So the first one is hydro pumped energy or something like that, hydro pump storage. And what this is basically you have two elevations, and I'll show an animation hopefully here, and there's two elevations on a hill. So you have down there's basically think of like a puddle of water at the bottom, and there's a puddle of water at the top of a mountain. And what happens here is basically as the water flows down the mountain into the other puddle, then that water that's flowing goes through a turbine that creates electricity. And then later in the day, once there is no electricity needed from this, they pump it back up using electricity, and then they pump it down again when it's needed. So it's kind of like a battery on a mountain. And another one is compressed air. So this one is basically where you take air and you compress it into either a cave underground or under a tank deep in the ocean. And when compressing this air into this underground cave, the air is really dense and compact and hot. And what they do is they release that air when they need it, and when they release it, that actually creates electricity as well. So that's another one, so compressed air and hydro-pumped water. And then the third one is the one that a lot of us know about, which is lithium-ion batteries, or just batteries in general. I mean, there are all kinds of batteries, but the most popular one is lithium-ion. And the gist of lithium-ion batteries, and I dive into this detail into the post, in a nutshell, is basically similar to the pumped hydro, where you're taking a thing and moving it from one place to the other. And as this thing moves from one side of the battery to the other side of the battery, then electricity is generated as a byproduct. And the thing you're kind of shuttling across the battery is actually lithium ions, and then the byproduct are electrons, and that actually creates the electricity. So that's those are three different ways that energy is stored. And as you dig into this, you'll realize that there's tons and tons of storage mechanisms. And the way that it helped me kind of think about this in a framework is basically the amount of time a thing can store something. So out of all the different storage mechanisms, each of them has the basically amount of time they can store something before it's depleted. And there's short-term storage and long-term storage. Right now, most batteries are short-term storage, and that's kind of like minutes, hours, and days. And then the pumped hydro I talked about and the compressed air is more long-term, so that's days, weeks, months, and even years. The goal is to transition batteries over to long-term and hopefully kind of use batteries for everything, just due to the fact that they have so many benefits. And that leads me kind of to my next point, which is when looking into renewable storage and the whole problem in itself, most entrepreneurs, most startups, most investors, R&D money and funding is really going into batteries. At least that's what I'm seeing. That's what a lot of people are talking about, are batteries. And that's mainly due to the lowering of manufacturing costs, but also the increase in quality of the batteries as well. And this may get some storage geeks upset, but it seems to me that the reason this is happening is there was a tipping point with Tesla. And Tesla kind of is leading the way in this aspect of lowering manufacturing costs, because they have all these gigafactories that they're creating. And they're manufacturing tons and tons of batteries, but they're pushing the edge of lithium-ion batteries and figuring out new and different ways and different kind of combinations within the battery to make it more efficient and higher quality. I'm going to keep this one short. There's a lot I can talk about, but I wanted to end it with that. So this week was a storage problem. And to end this video, I wanted to kind of end with the moral of the research that I realized is when researching into climate change, there tends to be stacks of problems within every sub-problem. So you have climate change, then you have the storage problem. And within the storage problem, there's additional problems within it. And it can be overwhelming because it's not just technological advancements, but there's financing to scale stuff. There needs to be policy put in place for kind of fair competition and all these different things that need to be done for us just to meet the timeline that's basically unreachable. And with that said, that can be concerning, and it can be almost too daunting to see and look at. And when thinking about this, my old mentality when I came across problems like this, when doing research just in my spare time, is I would think, oh, there's probably somebody else dealing with it. There's probably some teams of experts and different companies and people investing tons of time and money into this to solve this problem so we as humanity can survive. And that mentality is one that it's not good to have, because by saying you're pushing this off to someone else, you're not necessarily taking the responsibility in yourself. So I think by taking a mentality of, even if you don't take action on it, at least understanding the problem better and looking at it face on and saying, okay, this is scary and this is hard and this is difficult and it's going to take a lot of time and people to do this, but thoroughly understanding the problem, I think is one of the best steps towards actually taking a fundamental, impactful action. And we'll end this one with a quote from a lady that loved radiation. And her quote was, "Nothing in life is to be feared. It is only to be understood." And with that, my friends, I will see you next week. Subscribe to the newsletter if you want. And internet, thanks for tuning in.